Let's talk about the draft now as we head to the ESPN 99.1 hotline. Joining us next, national radio host, Sports Map Radio's own Jake Asman. Jake, welcome back to the show, man. How you doing today?
JT, my man, I'm doing great. Draft day is almost here, so what's not to like?
Man, I was going to ask you, as you know, to put your fan hat on for a second instead of your analyst hat, and tell me how you feel as a Jets fan heading into this pick at number 2, where it's presumed you will take Zach Wilson, versus how you felt heading into the draft, where it was presumed that you would take Sam Darnold. But you seem pretty excited, man, so I would assume you're feeling pretty good about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing with the Darnold draft pick is when they traded up from 6 to 3, the thought was they were not going to be able to get Darnold because, there was a lot of people that thought he was going to go 1 to Cleveland. So I was preparing as a Jets fan for Baker Mayfield, Josh Rosen. So when it became obvious that Baker was going to be the guy at 1, I was pumped up for Darnold, and obviously, it didn't work out. A lot of it, I'm sure, was more the Jets than Darnold. But, as far as Zach Wilson, I'll admit when they missed out on getting Trevor Lawrence, when they won 2 meaningless, regular season games in December, I was bummed out. But the more and more I watch Zach Wilson and talk to people that know him, that have worked with him, that watch tape on him, I think he's, just as good as any of these prospects that have come out over the last couple of years. Now, they got to put him in a car that could drive. They got to surround him with some talent. They got to get him better coaching than what Sam Darnold had. But as far as prospects go, I'm really optimistic about Zach Wilson. He can make all the throws. I love his temperament, his personality. He's a film junkie, which I think you need to be if you're going to play the position at a high level, especially in the New York market. So I'm optimistic, and now it's just on the Jets to surround him with the right pieces and basically do the opposite of what they just did the last 3 years for Sam Darnold.
Jake Asman with us here on the ESPN 99.1 hotline. I'm going to try to blow your mind with this next scenario at number 3 and think and see if you think that this could ever play out tomorrow during the draft. I don't know if you've been paying attention to Elon Musk and Bitcoin, but some have accused him, like Dave Portnoy, of pumping and dumping Bitcoin, just like some people will do with the stock. I wonder if that's going to happen at number 3, where the 49ers could get away with the King's ransom more than they traded up to get 3 and walk away with Kyle Pitts at 4 or Kyle Pitts at 5 and Jimmy G's their guy, because all I keep hearing is they love 5 quarterbacks. Anytime somebody tells me they love 5 of something when we know they should only love 1, it raises some red flags. So I don't know, Jake. I just feel like they could pull some crazy thing off where they move out of 3, get a bunch for it, and the whole time they played everybody.
It would be remarkable if that happens. I just don't see it happening because I just think when you're a team, when you trade up that high, you have to go quarterback at that spot. You can't mess around. I think when they traded up, maybe they had an idea for which player they wanted at 3. A lot of people point to Mac Jones. But I think as they started to really evaluate these quarterbacks, they like Trey Lance. Maybe they still like Justin Fields. I really don't know what the Niners are going to do tomorrow night, JT. I just think no matter what, though, they're taking a quarterback at 3. I'd be shocked if anything other than that's the outcome.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see if that's Mac Jones or if it's Trey Lance or if it's potentially Justin Fields there at 3. Should we be buying into the hype of Kyle Pitts? Have you seen enough at Florida where you think that dude's special at the next level?
I'm always wary of just taking, an outlier position that high. I mean, if he goes 4th to the Falcons, you're talking about the highest tight end ever drafted. But then when you watch him, right? I mean, if you watched any of Florida, you couldn't miss his dominance on the football field this past year. So I get it. I'm just always a little weary when you take, a non-premium position that high. If you're taking someone that high, I usually like it to be, obviously quarterback, offensive line, edge rusher, even corner. But look, Kyle Pitts is as good as any tight end we've seen that's come out. He's more of a wide receiver than he even is a tight end. And if he goes on to have a career like Gronkowski or Travis Kelce, then who are we to say it's a bad pick? So he has to be that type of player with the expectations that are on him. But there's no reason to think he won't be that type of player based on everything we've heard.
How much do you think we get movement tomorrow night? Do you think we get a lot of trades, or do you think it's a ho-hum night in regards to that and more the excitement is around the players that are picked?
I think we've had so much smoke about these quarterbacks that where I'd be surprised if there's not some fire, meaning I could see all 5 of these guys being off the board before the 9th pick. I really could see a lot of movement. I could see trades. I could see maybe not even having a defensive player picked until Dallas at number 10. So I think we get some fireworks tomorrow night. I really do. I'd be surprised if we don't get at least 2 teams that move up to try and get a quarterback.
Jake Asman with us here on the ESPN 99.1 hotline, talking about the 2021 NFL Draft, which is finally upon us tomorrow. Where do you sit on the wide receivers with Jamar Chase, Waddle, and Devontae Smith? If you were a team that needed one in the top 10, which direction are you going? And then the team that needs one next, who do you take second?
This is a tough question. I love Devontae Smith, and I get it. Oh, Jamar Chase, he's incredible, and Jalen Waddle, we love his speed. I get it. But all I know is anytime I watch Devontae Smith, he dominated every game he's in. I don't care about his height. I don't care about any of that stuff. When you watch the game, he was the best player on the field. He won the Heisman Trophy as a wide receiver. That's all I needed to see. And Waddle got hurt last year, and their offense didn't miss a beat because of how dynamic Devontae Smith is. So I understand, he's not the biggest wide receiver. He doesn't weigh the most. But sometimes teams make mistakes because they look at metrics, they look at measurements, and they don't just look at what's right in front of them. And that Devontae Smith was the best player on the field last year. He's the guy I'd take, but look, if you told me my team's going to end up with Jalen Waddle or Jamar Chase, I'm good with that too. I think it really comes down to, what's your preference? What type of receiver are you looking for? If I'm given a ranking, I go Devontae Smith 1, Chase 2, and Waddle 3, but I'm good with any of those guys.
Yeah, they all seem to be very talented, and many NFL executives certainly drooling over the fact that they could potentially have one of those three on their roster. We've talked about quarterbacks. We've talked about wide receivers. Is there another player where you're very interested to see where they ultimately land tomorrow night in the first round?
Yeah, I'm curious to see if there's any running backs that go in the first round. The old adage in recent NFL history is, you can never draft a running back in round one. And I agree with that for the most part, unless it's later in the first round. I think there's some value in maybe getting a running back late in round one, even if you have to trade back into round one to get that player, because then you get that player on a fifth-year option. Like Travis Etienne and Najee Harris, to me, are both first-round talent. But because they play running back, does that mean they're not going to get drafted in the first round? So I'm fascinated to see if either one of those guys could be first-round picks. The over-under in Vegas is at 0.5 if a running back will be taken. I tend to lean over on that, but we shall see what these NFL teams are thinking.
That's going to be very interesting tomorrow night. All right, before I get you out of here, Jake, I do want to ask you a couple questions about the city you live in there in Houston. First, the NFL side of things. What's the latest with Deshaun Watson, and how are the Texans handling it as they head into the draft with a lot of other issues that they have to address outside of the looming situation with their star quarterback?
Things this week have been kind of calm. There have not been any new civil cases that have been filed. There have not been any new court rulings or anything other than the status quo from a couple of weeks ago. So as far as an update there, it's pretty much the same. The NFL is doing their own investigation. Deshaun Watson maintains his innocence. The Houston Police Department was looking into, possibly, filing a charge against Deshaun Watson. That'd be criminal charges. That hasn't happened. I don't believe, based on what I've heard from people I've spoken with, that is going to happen, but you just don't know. So it's still a very fluid situation. But right now, nothing is really changing other than the Texans don't have a first or a second round pick. And right now they have continued to maintain that they'll let the legal process play out. Deshaun's their quarterback, and they had no intention to trade him before all this. So I think the latest with Deshaun Watson is that we're kind of in a holding pattern until things continue to develop with these lawsuits.
Is there another NFL team that is sitting in a worse situation, from a draft situation, from a cap situation, from maybe even just an overall talent situation, not to mention the Deshaun Watson situation, than what the Texans are dealing with? Is there one that's worse off?
I don't think so. I think if you look in Vegas, they got the lowest win total right now, JT. So this is a bad football team. They were bad with Deshaun Watson last year, winning only 4 games, and now you're probably not going to have them for I'd imagine at least the first 8 games and maybe the entire season. Who knows if, what the NFL will do suspension-wise, and who knows if Deshaun even shows up with the no trade request. So it's a messy spot. I will say this. Nick Caserio is beyond qualified to be a team's general manager. I think he has a good process. It's going to be difficult for him to really, overhaul this roster when you don't have a first or a second round pick, when you had very little salary cap space. So this is certainly a rebuilding year. I think the Texans' plan is just to try and, maybe find some diamond in the rough players, use, undrafted free agency to pick up some guys that can compete for some jobs, and just try and, improve this roster as much as possible. They will have salary cap flexibility after the season to retool in free agency. So they're probably going to be bad this year with the goal of probably trying to get the first pick in the draft for next year. And then they'll trade Deshaun Watson, I believe, at some point, get whatever they can for him and really start fresh. But, this is a bad team right now, and I think Texans fans are well aware that they're probably not winning more than 3 games.
Last hour, we concluded by talking about the Timberwolves and what the play should be for a team that if they fall outside the top three, have to give up their pick to the Golden State Warriors. If they fall in the top three of the draft lottery, they get to stay where they're at. But they've won 3 in a row, so you start sitting guys and tanking. The Rockets are in that conversation as well. If you're an NBA executive, what's your play, man? Do you do everything you can to put guys on the court that aren't going to win you games? Because we know the players on the court that are good enough will still try hard. But what's your play as an NBA executive if you're sitting in a position where you could be in the lottery?
I would lose every game possible. Now, obviously players don't tank, but there's ways to manipulate the roster where you're not winning. I mean, you just saw the Rockets. They shut down John Wall for the year because he tweaked his hamstring, and then they leaked to the media, this will allow the Rockets to try out different lineups before the year's over. Actually, no. This will allow the Rockets to finish with the worst record in the Western Conference and thus guaranteeing themselves a top 4 slot. And the key for the Rockets, they only get their first-round pick this year, JT, if they finish with the 4th pick or worse. Right?
Yeah.
So they need to finish
like
with the worst record possible. Exactly. So they're trying to lose every game at this point so they can guarantee themselves that they'll get their first-round pick. Imagine if they don't end up getting their first-round pick this year. They're picking 5, and that goes to the Thunder because of the Westbrook trade. So, every NBA team does this. I don't think the NBA could really do anything about it. It's just the right thing to do. It's a superstar-driven league, and if you're not picking high in the draft, it's that much harder to try and find a potential superstar. Yeah,
you were cheering for it in December with the Jets. They didn't come through for you, man. Maybe the Rockets down there will.
No, it's true. And, I grew up in New York, a huge Knicks fan. I mean, my whole life was a Knicks fan. It's basically tanking. Besides this year, we finally have a good basketball team.
How about those Knicks, man? I mean, what a team. I'll tell you what, I got League Pass, so I watch so many NBA games every night. And there's been a stretch for, I think, like the first 4 games of that winning streak. I watched every one of them, man. And it's great to see when you watch the Knicks play. At no point am I like, wow, they are so much better than the opponent. And then you look at the end and they're like, yep, that team played better tonight.
It's amazing what coaching can do, right? I mean, Tom Thibodeau comes in and he holds guys accountable. They go from one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA to now the best defensive team in the league. Julius Randle in year 7 has emerged as an all-NBA player. I mean, R.J. Barrett's taken a huge leap from year 1 to year 2. They're a fun team to watch. They're obviously not a championship-caliber team, but the fact of the matter is they might be a team that could finish with a top 4 record in the Eastern Conference and host a playoff round. I mean, that is just incredible given the history of the Knicks the last 20 years. All right, man. Finally, I'm going to have you pay attention to something with Thibodeau. When he was coaching with the T-Wolves, I was fortunate to sit courtside a couple of times, and he'd walk right in front of me. And when he does this thing, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but when the shot clock starts to get down, I bet it's around like 12 or 10, his hand starts shaking just tremendously. It's shaking, shaking, shaking. And when the ball hits the rim, or it goes through the net, or the other team gets the ball, his hand immediately stops shaking, and it doesn't start shaking again until the shot clock is down to 12 or 10. You have to watch it. It still happens with the Knicks. It is one of the craziest things I've ever noticed a coach do in regards to a little bit of a tick while they coach. But Thibodeau, every possession, man, he lives and dies with it. And I found that so fascinating that, like, his body has a natural reaction to a shot clock that's weighing down in regards to the number of seconds. It's crazy. That's incredible. I definitely will watch for that now. Please text me when you see it, okay, Jake? Absolutely, my man. Hey, if they keep winning games, I'll start shaking with them. Boy, man. I'm sure Timberwolves fans would have done the same. Hey, always appreciate it, Jake. Enjoy the draft tomorrow. Thanks so much for the time today, man. Anytime, JT. Thanks for having me.